Hello and welcome to The Found Cause. We have found our cause in serving the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm the Michael man behind the machine, yes. And to my right, your left is...
Sebastian, the archivist.
And all the way across the airwaves, it's...
Theodore, under the PC, under the person of Christ.
The person of Christ. It was just us three, you know it's going to be some crazy episode because normally our good viewing episodes, our responses to people, popular people more handsome than us, but... when it's just us three, the topic could be anything. And it's probably something unhinged and crazy. And speaking of unhinged, today's topic is kind of pseudo-inspired, maybe more than pseudo, fully inspired by a podcast that's way more popular than us, more handsome than us, called The Haunted Cosmos. Haunted Cosmos is a Christian podcast. It's out on Spotify or Google or iTunes, wherever you find your podcast. Good podcast. I would say they are edgy in that they are not always right. So they're conservative Christians who I would normally agree on, the Presbyterian, so take that with a grain of salt. And then also they push the boundaries. So a lot of things they say are experimental. The theme of, they do a couple podcasts that I would describe them all that way. The theme of this particular podcast is what the title suggests, Haunted Cosmos. That the world is not just stuff. That's their tagline. There are supernatural things that happen. We all agree with that. We're Christians, and so we should. And so their goal is to examine mythologies and supernatural stories from a Christian worldview and determine whether or not they're real. Because I think typically we would say, no, they're not real because ghosts aren't real or dragons aren't real or whatever. They're mythological things. But because we are Christians, they're trying to rediscover the fact that there are supernatural things that do happen, and maybe dragons are real because they're really dinosaurs, or maybe ghosts are real because they're demons, not because they're the past descendants of dead humans. So they try to look at it from a Christian perspective. And I'll say I enjoy it. It's pretty popular. However, personally, and I don't speak for all of us, but personally, I think that they are flipping too far the other way, in that I believe that for years and years and years, like thousands of years, Christians have been beating back the vicious tide of superstition that pops up in every generation. And ingrained superstition is the hardest to kill. Like new superstition that your grandma just thought of, kind of easy to excuse, right? Because it's just your grandma saying that if you knock your ankles together twice and then you go up to bat, that you'll hit a home run. And you can just easily dismiss that and say, you're the only person that thinks that. You came up with that yourself. It's not right. But if everybody says that elves exist in the forest, it's way harder to fight that. And it's not just innocuous to believe in mythology. It usually paves the way for anti-Christian attitudes. I think it paves the way for witchcraft. It paves the way for just demonic deception of every sort. And so I don't think we should lightly reopen the crypts that Christians have pressed firmly down, right? We've killed the belief in fairies. We killed the belief in many, many mythologies and many, many fake religions. I don't think that we should be flippantly re-examining things that we have destroyed and saying, well, should we resurrect part of that? So I want to take a critical look at mythologies today from a Christian perspective and not just dismiss them out of hand as fake, but with the methodology of saying, how do we determine if something is fake? And so that being said, let's talk about some mythical creatures. Let's talk about how they could be real and how, in general, we should examine myth to see if it is real or if it is fake, and make sure that we're not flippantly opening old lies that we should have kept shut. That being said, I want to start with just a classic. And this is one that if you are new to Christianity, maybe you haven't heard of it, but if you've been a Christian for a while, I hope you've heard of this. And if not, welcome. This is a cool episode. Dinosaurs. Dragons. Some wouldn't connect the two, but a dragon, I think, doesn't take huge brains to realize that a dragon is a scaly giant lizard that attacks people and is generally evil and is associated with the devil. A dinosaur is a huge, scary creature, originally called dinosaurs because they are terrible lizards. They have giant teeth. They look aggressive. They're large. They're all extinct. And we have drawings of dragons that look exactly like drawings of dinosaurs from the medieval ages when they hadn't come up with the concept of dinosaurs before. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that people knew about dinosaurs. They just called them dragons.
And embellished a little bit.
And probably embellished a little bit, as with all things, especially with animals that were rare. You know, it's one thing if you see a cow, like everybody knows what a cow is. There's not that much embellishment you can do with a cow because everybody can go see a cow. But if an animal's kind of rare, you can embellish because not everybody sees it, so they will believe you.
So what's controversial about dinosaurs and Christianity?
well, classically, dinosaurs for the longest time were rejected by fundamental Christians because fundamentalist Christians would say dinosaurs supposedly lived millions or billions of years ago, or really millions of years ago, according to evolutionists, and therefore they can't be real, so they're fake. We would simply say they did not live millions of years ago. They lived alongside humans, just like every other species of animal, and they've gone extinct, just like many, many species of animal. So I think that's a pretty commonly accepted view these days, but 40 years ago, that was not so common to say that dinosaurs were real and are compatible with Christianity. We are young Earth creationists, so we reject old Earth Christianity, or we reject old Earth theorems. There are genuine Christians who are old Earth, but we're strong believers in young Earth, and yet we still believe dinosaurs roamed the Earth. So that means we're in the category of wackernutters that say that humans walked alongside dinosaurs. Were we buddies? No. I think all the evidence goes to say that humanity and dinosaurs were not buddies. All the stories we have about dragons are that they are, at the very least, awe-inspiring and powerful, and at the worst, evil and destructive, and they kill people. So we walked on the same planet, but we weren't friends.
Yeah, that's pretty good how the view has changed really recently. And I would say we do have an example of that in scripture. I would say in the book of Job, what is being described there, Leviathan and Behemoth, I would say they fit the descriptions of dinosaurs that we have found bones of, or fossils, excuse me, to be more precise, but we'll call them bones if I mix them up. Like the description of the behemoth has a very long tail. I would say it fits the description in the book of Job of a sauropod, or one of the species of sauropods, the gigantic, biggest dinosaurs.
Huge, long necks, long tails. You probably know it. Pretty classic dinosaur.
Lives in marshy lands, walks across rivers, like it's just a puddle of water. And the coolest thing, I saw this years ago, but in the tombstone of a bishop, you can look this up too, it's easy to find. Engraved in the tombstone of an English bishop in the city of Carlisle around the 1500s, there's an image there, dated from the time, so it's not, some would say it must be a modern fabrication. No, it's from the 15th century, sorry. And it has two sauropods with their very long necks, interlocked, you could say embracing, whatever you want to call it, and then very long tails, and at one of them has two tiny spikes at the end of the tail. So you might be thinking, okay, clearly someone was drunk or on something, maybe got some opium from China and started engraving this in the bishop's tombstone, and nobody caught the artist. But if you look at them again, you can look at this yourself. In my opinion, looks exactly like how you would depict a sauropod in a museum. It's not just some cheesy drawing of an animal. It looks actually very precise. It looks like the actual creature that we see in a museum today. Well, of course, with skin and reconstruction. And fascinatingly, it must mean that people knew, or at least would have been able to observe the bone. The worst case scenario, they would have been able to see the bones of a sauropod and piece together this is what the animal must have looked like. Or in another case, to give some credit to Hunter Cosmos, it is possible that creatures like dinosaurs were still walking around until maybe 1,000 years ago or so. Yeah, I'm not saying there were hundreds or thousands of dinosaurs, maybe just a couple, one or two. And why weren't there more? Because they're really big and scary. You don't want that walking around your crops, your cities. You don't want a sauropod walking around in your village. It's going to trample everything and probably kill everybody in the town. So the theory is by people like Answers in Genesis and ICR that they were hunted down, and as their environment was changing, swamps were being drained, they were eventually driven to extinction.
Right. And there's a lot of theory. The true science on this is still coming up with theories, because there's also theories that dinosaurs couldn't really exist on our lower oxygen Earth than before the flood, which had a higher oxygen Earth, as Amber would attest to, and that these large creatures couldn't live well on low oxygen like we are today, and so they probably required swamps, like you said, to hold their body weight up when they didn't used to, and other difficulties that just make surviving hard. The interesting thing again about dragons is that they also exist in most every culture. So from the depths of the Congolese describe in some of their a particular tribe in the Congo describes deep in the jungle a sauropod creature living there, a big dragon creature living there. And they're very separated from the European tradition of dragons, which is very separated from the Chinese tradition of dragons, which is really separated from the Jewish tradition of dragons and the Persian tradition of dragons. And so all of these traditions of dragons are pretty similar. Hairy, sometimes not hairy creatures, all of them have some sort of fiery breath, which is odd because we don't know creatures that breathe fire today. However, because they all have fiery breath, and even the Bible describes fiery serpents, there's some connection with fire and dragons and serpents and angels and demons, because angels and demons are also referred to as seraphim, which means the fiery ones, but could also mean serpent. And obviously the serpent in the garden was evil and probably somehow connected to Satan or something, right? So serpents are cursed and enemies of man. There's some connection here with dinosaurs also being serpentile, being reptiles. But in any case, dinosaurs are attested to as dragons in every culture. So we have good reason there archaeologically, historically, from many narrators, and from the Bible itself talking about dinosaurs, that dinosaurs, dragons, are real. Yeah. So there's your plus. I think that's kind of uncontroversial these days with Christians. I know that some would be fighting that, but honestly, those are like the stinkiest, baldest scholars out there that don't have lives that are fighting that one. Like they think Christians saying that dragons are real is going to really hurt the Christian testimony. I don't think so, guys. Like we all believe in dinosaurs. That it's only going to help the Christian testimony there. However, let's get on to more controversial mythological creatures. So if you thought dragons were controversial, hold on to your hats, because there are some other ones that Haunted Cosmos was pushing as potentially real, and I think we should examine them. Let's talk about giants. So really large, tall people. It's another one that's discussed in the Bible. What do you guys think about giants?
Describe giants. How were they defining giants? I haven't seen their episodes, by the way.
Really tall. I don't think they have a giant specific episode yet, but very tall, large humans that are the enemies of humans. You know, they are large and basically enslave humans.
Like King Og in the Bible?
Exactly like King Og in the Bible.
Or Goliath?
Yep, or Goliath. Or, I mean, some would say the Nephilim. I think it's hotly debated on whether or not Nephilim really is giants, or if it's just that it's the descendants of demons, or if it's even referring to if the Nephilim are great men that are separate from the offspring of demons and women. There's a lot of questions around the use of the word Nephilim. Traditionally, and I mean this in the English tradition, English tradition would say that Nephilim are giants themselves, but the Hebrew questions that. Yes, so there are definitely giants in the Bible. We're just not sure if they are the Nephilim specifically.
And I should have, now I mentioned giants. There's a reference from, I believe it's either Spanish or Portuguese explorers going down south to Patagonia. The Strait of Magallanes, I believe Strait of Magallanes, Portuguese. My goodness, I'm forgetting my history. Down south Patagonia, they were describing very, very large humans, more than twice the size of a normal European man, Spanish or Portuguese or Brit, and that had gigantic fur coats, and they lived in small tribes in the middle of the steppe or whatever you want to call it in Patagonia. So take it with a grain of salt, but there is precedent in scripture and other mythologies that there were very large creatures that were humanoids, and they were very violent.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, I think the Christian take here is I'm uncomfortable with fake humanoid hybrid things, because I think the main offense that brought the flood about was human demon hybrids. And so I don't think, I can't see why God would tolerate that in the New World. Like if he was going to flood the world to rid the world of human demon hybrids, why would he not flood? Like why would he allow it back, right? If it was so bad that he had to flood the world, why would he allow it back? So I am reticent to believe in human-ish hybrids. I think there's really only two categories of intelligent beings on the planet that aren't, animals, I guess, are intelligent in some sense, but like man-level intelligence, we're close to it. I think there's spiritual angels, so many different types of angels, cherubim, seraphim, certain types of demons. We don't know all the kinds of angels / spiritual beings there are, but I think there's intelligent spirit beings, and then there's men. I don't think that there's a third category of like cyclops or giants that aren't really men, right? That are like another breed of creature. I would say giant people are people, and I'll stand by that, right? A person is a person no matter how tall, as Dr. Seuss never said. But we all know famously the Bible has, like you mentioned, Goliath. Every kid that has ever heard about the Bible knows about Goliath. Goliath, tall guy. Some would say, like Sebastian, lame, would say that he was only like 6'5". Boo. I'll let him be 5 or 9'5" or whatever he could be in the Masoretic texts. But he's still a person, like he's not a mythical creature. He is just a man. He's just a huge man. That's all.
For the standards of the time, something over 6 feet was tall.
He's big, but it's not like his staff wouldn't be like a weaver's beam, it's regular sized spear. Like the spear doesn't increase that big for the 6'5" guy. Anyways, I digress. If you know your debate between the Septuagint and the Masoretic texts on numbers, that's a dispute between the Greek and the Hebrew there on how tall Goliath was. But Goliath, tall guy, whoever he was a tall guy in the category of giant, and he's still a person. So is he mythological? Some would say, right? Like atheists often will say, oh, there's no way Goliath was real, or if he was real, he was only 6'5". I think he could be 9 feet tall, right? It's clearly a genetic abnormality. His brothers, the Rephaim, his family, were also tall, which tells me it's some genetic thing. And there are genetic anomalies, especially early in post-Noah's flood, when genes are still healthier. I think you can have a crazy abnormality that is still livable. Whereas today, our genes are so messed up because of incest that a similar height problem would probably just kill you, because you would have other conditions on top of the height problem that would have hurt you. Whereas the Rephaim were clearly rare even for their time, but they didn't die, right? They were still living giant men.
And were able to fight and carry stuff.
And were clearly influential on their people, because they were, Goliath was the champion of the Philistines, and King Og, like you mentioned, was a huge guy that Moses and crew had to fight, and he was huge, and they make it a point to say that his bed was gigantic, and so he was clearly an oppressive giant person, but he's just that. He's a person. So I affirm this mythology as being true. There were biblically confirmed giants. That's as far as I'll go. How about you, Theodore? Any comments on giants?
Nope, not yet.
Yeah, I think we've talked about the whole Nephilim thing before. I don't want to get into it because it's not really the topic of this episode, but look it up if you're wondering why I'm not talking about the Nephilim, because I don't really think the Nephilim are the giants in reference in Genesis. Not that I don't believe in giants, I just don't think they were the Nephilim.
Now, to get more into the more strange side of things, speaking of giants, if you know other mythological creatures that are more or less well known would be Cyclops. That is one that I thought was really interesting from Greek and Roman myths, because they may have had some inspiration in real life things we observe in the natural world that were just misunderstood by the Greeks at the time. The theory that I would hold to, for example, for such a creature, is that there is a natural origin to what was conceived. They would have seen this fossil of a baby, either mammoth or elephant, a subspecies of smaller elephant, and there were no elephants in Greece, as we all know, and they would, because the socket is for the trunk, for the snout of the elephant is right in the middle of the skull. For someone who has never observed that kind of animal, you would think that's where the eye goes, because if you see a human skeleton, lo and behold, the sockets are where the eyes go. So if you see this fossil that has one socket, draw your conclusions. This must have had one eye, and the skull is gigantic. So it's probably a very large humanoid with one eye.
Yeah, if you look up pictures of dwarf elephant skulls, you'll see that it is kind of freaky looking. Like it's not obviously an elephant. I don't know. I tend to think that people aren't so dumb that they picked it up and were like, ooh, big human. I think that they if they found mammoth bones, they would know it was a mammoth. They found it with the rest of the skeleton. Like they weren't retarded. But that doesn't mean that they weren't inspired by the thing. And so, this kind of looks like a person's head. Like, what if there were creatures with one large eye that were giant like this thing? So that I can also see some natural origin to Cyclops myth.
Yes. Now, what we would say is, and this is where we have a problem with the takes on the podcast and of Hunter Cosmos, is that the myths that were drawn from these creatures, that's where there's really no truth. For example, then the Odysseus battles Cyclops. And there's this mythology behind the origin of Cyclops, how they were children of Poseidon, I believe. Yeah, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting my mythology too. And they were creatures of some sort of intelligence that were able to communicate, live. They hunted, they ate people, they ruled their societies. That's what say it's where the Greeks went off to create their own mythologies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I think there's any truth to that compared to the biblical worldview.
Yeah, and I think this is where we should get into, and we'll talk about some more mythical creatures here, but this is where we should pause and say, why were we so unskeptical of dragons and of giants, but we're going to start to get skeptical of cyclopses and mermaids and other creatures? And I think it comes down to this. One, if the Bible talks about a creature, well, that's the word of God. We believe it to be true. So the Bible talks about angels and demons. We have not seen angels and demons. We don't have evidences like archaeological evidence of angels and demons, but we believe it because it's in the Bible. We have archaeological evidence for dragons, so we believe in dragons. The Bible also references dragons as a creature, it describes dragons in Revelation. It describes the ancient serpent in the Bible. There's also other references to dragons like throughout the poetry of the Bible and in some of the symbology from the prophets. And we also have references to like strange creatures in the Bible that are spiritual in Revelation. So like lion-headed thing with a scorpion tail and wings, and I think we tend to always categorize that as some sort of spiritual creature. But if the world were to discover some sort of strange hybrid chimera creature like that, I guess we would all point and say, well, there's the thing referenced in Revelation. So we leave room that we don't know everything the Bible is describing. However, if the Bible describes it, we obviously believe it could be real. It is real. However, the Bible doesn't describe a lot of these other mythical creatures like mermaids or cyclopses. And so not only does it not have the Bible talking about it, we also only have mythology talking about it. And I think that's the kicker. Haunted Cosmos, because it's so pro there being supernatural things, it will take mythologies that are obviously fake. And by obviously fake, I mean the stories change. You do not know who wrote the story. They change based on what region you ask. So people have different versions of these stories wherever you go. So we don't know what the true version of it is. Those kind of things are mythologies. And they say because the mythology references something, it references a cyclops or mermaids, that even if the mythology is fake, there must be some seed of truth that mermaids are real or cyclopses are real. Otherwise, they wouldn't. Who could possibly be so creative as to think of a one-eyed man? It's not a huge stretch. Like Sebastian said, it could have come from elephant skulls. You could have just thought of it. I don't really get that one. It's like, on one hand, they know, and I've heard the Haunted Cosmos say that ancient humans were not dumb, so they know that, and yet then they'll think that they were so dumb that they couldn't have made up creatures that they've never seen before. Of course they could make up creatures. We make up creatures we've never seen before. Gremlins from the movie Gremlins, hit 1980s movie, aren't real. They're not based off of anything. They're not real. They're like a mix of a cat and a goblin. I mean, that's
a relief.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
In case you're worried about gremlins, they're not real. They are just made up. So it is a mythology, and none of the Gremlins movie was real, and Gremlins aren't real. They aren't based off of a true story. And so the same way it goes for Cyclops. I don't think anybody ever observed a Cyclops. It's just straight mythology. The Game of Thrones movies, they're just the TV show and books, just fake, right? Kind of based on British history, sure, but the actual events are fake. And so same goes for mermaids. I'm going to put it out there. It's strange that there are some people believers in mermaids. I would go back to my statement on not wanting to believe in human hybrid creatures. And mermaids are apparently like intelligent, supposedly neutral creatures, right? Not demonic, but not human, but intelligent, and they live in the waters, and they're like half women or half men and half fish. That just isn't a category of thing I believe the Bible allows to exist. I would say they must
Perhaps.
be spiritual or fake.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Theodore.
Perhaps it's an extension of the wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a fish in human clothing.
But they're intelligent.
Because they're possessed by a demon.
Yeah. See, I just, why would I believe that? Like, the only places that mermaids show up to are in, well, I don't know. There's a lot of references, a lot of sea references, especially sailors come up with like crazy stuff they've seen overseas. Some of it may be reliable, like there may be sea serpents in the waters. I mean, again, dinosaurs could be in the waters that we haven't seen. The sea is a big place, but often sea people will reference mermaids. But we do not see mermaids in the modern day. Like, people don't see mermaids except for like really weird fringe fake CGI on YouTube, where you see mermaids. And so I don't think anybody has an incentive to hide mermaids. They only show up in myth. I think Christopher Columbus reports mermaids. That's why I hold off on saying it's all myth, because there are these sea captains who like add strange mythologies to their logs, and I'm not sure what to think of that.
I may have a suggestion. I did not know this until very recently. In a desert or the ocean, when the water's calm and everything's flat, especially in the Sahara or the ocean, when a human stares at a very flat and pretty much identical, the same background level line of sight, the brain starts to invent things. That's why you start seeing mirage, espejismo, mirage in the desert. It's because the brain starts to become, double check me on this, please, starts to hallucinate and invent things because of how symmetrical and perfect everything is, like flat with nothing.
But
and identical is, you start seeing creatures in the ocean if it's just flat and there's nothing changing the landscape. Any change in the landscape, your brain starts making things up, like a mirage.
I hate to attribute it to just hallucinations, though. Like, that's kind of odd, isn't it?
It could be.
I would think it's like either an animal mix-up or it's real mermaids, or he's lying.
Or he could be making it up.
He could be making it up. He wouldn't be the only one, though. So this is where Haunted Cosmos is pushing, that they're saying so many people talk about mermaids, they must be real. But like, where are they, though? Yeah, right? Like, they say so many people talk about Bigfoot, he must be real. And like, conceivably, Bigfoot could be a creature, especially if he's not very intelligent. But Bigfoot is supposed to be, if you listen to your Bigfoot mythology or lore, he's supposed to be intelligent, like intelligent enough that he lives in houses and makes tools. So I just don't believe it. I'll say I don't believe in a category of creature that doesn't need man's oversight to thrive. Like, men were made to take care of all creation, and so unless something is demonic, it's spiritual. If it's physical thing, I believe it should be under the dominion of men. And so if it's not really under the dominion of men, it's intelligent enough not to be under the dominion of men, I don't believe it exists. It's spiritual or it's fake. That's why I say all this. And I think that you need strong evidence outside of hearsay to overthrow that. So you need strong evidence, like archaeological physical evidence or modern day evidence, right? Like, hearsay from Christopher Columbus is interesting and it would be good supporting evidence, but it's not good primary evidence. Just like mythologies about dragons are not good primary evidence. The Bible is great primary evidence, and archaeological evidence is great primary evidence, and cross-cultural reference is a great primary evidence, but mythologies themselves should only ever be secondary cited sources, not the primary thing that tells you that a creature exists.
For skeptics watching our show, we hold the Bible to such a high standard because we believe that the God, creator of the universe, is capable of communicating his truth clearly, concisely, directly enough to us humans that we can understand it and then interpret it, and then also be able to get what this deity is trying to communicate, in this case Yahweh of the Bible. That's why we hold it to a higher standard than we would the myths of Prometheus or any other, or sirens or mermaids or whatever other creatures you might think. Norse mythology, Irish mythology. A lot of many cases, these myths, they don't even claim to have the same authority as scripture. It's biggest one. They change a lot, and by region, and they are based on hearsay.
And that's the key thing. The mythologies are really obvious if you were the one finding them out. Like if you read it from a mythology book, it doesn't seem obvious because here's somebody just telling you the mythology. But mythologies are oral traditions, and so the way you get your current book of Greek mythology is because somebody went and interviewed a bunch of different Greeks about the traditions of what Zeus did or what Poseidon did, and they are not consistent. So their stories are different, not just that they have different stories, but that they have different stories for the same events. Like the overthrow of Zeus's father, Titan, that is different in different Greek mythologies. And so there is a consolidated Greek mythology that picks just one of the traditions and says that's the Greek tradition, but it's not. There are other competing traditions. Just like in Hinduism, there's a ton of different competing gods and creation stories, and in paganism, just like any other mythology, there's tons of competing stories for the same events. And so in the same way, there are competing stories for mermaids that have different origins of where they come from that clearly cannot all be right, and that's why it's mythology, is that people are just making it up. Whether it's demonic deception or something, they're making up at least those details about mermaids because they're not consistent. Whereas the Bible, of course, is consistent.
Speaking of the Cyclops, and competing stories, I was thinking, we were mentioning like the Western tradition maybe, but in the East, there's the idea of the third eye. And so I was just reading through this article from thesymbolicworld.com, and it seems to be a really good read about like the Cyclops and different interpretations of that, different representations of him, and like some say he had the normal two eyes, but they were just closed, or they were gouged out or absent or whatever, and so he was consigned to physical labor and working the earth and constructing, but yet he had like a transcendent view still.
A third eye.
I don't know, you can read that article. It seems to be written really well, at least for entertainment.
Well, and if that's the case, it's just a normal man who's been blinded and also is wise, then it's not, I mean, it's not really mythological, right? It's not really a Cyclops, it's just a dude, right? And the Cyclops angle of it is an allegory. I think also you have to be careful, speaking of mythologies, that people aren't allegorizing something. I really, really, really hate to over allegorize things and say, oh yes, the ancients didn't mean to say that mermaids are real. They really meant to say that, you know, their emperor wasn't taxing them too much grain, like some crazy things, to try to get rid of supernatural references. I think it's very possible that the ancients were just making up stories, or were wrong, as opposed to making some intelligent allegory. Isn't it odd that atheists will often attack the Bible as being either totally made up or some extremely advanced mythology about the stars? Like if you ever see the film Zeitgeist, it has many conspiracy theories in it. One of them is that Christianity is actually a allegory for the movement of the stars, and it's like the house of bread, aka Bethlehem, is a particular star symbol, and one of the stars or comet had moved through it, and it was just the ancients were making the Gospels as an allegory for the way the stars are moving, or something insane. Like the ancients were single-handedly both very stupid and incredibly intense, allegorical, high-minded philosophers. Can't really have both.
And there's Inception in there too, because if it's like an allegory or representation of the stars or whatever, they even put wise men who see the stars, and those stars bring them to the King of Kings, the Prince of Peace, Lord
Amazing.
of Lords.
What does it mean? Like a star saw the stars and came? I don't know.
Sounds like Gnosticism to me.
What are the stars as stars? What do stars look at for stars? Surely not themselves. Maybe some different type of thing. Anyways, I'm sorry for the digression. Let's circle back, baby. So that's the judge that we use to judge mythological things. Is it in line with the Bible? Is it some third species that is also intelligent and isn't a demon? That's the one that bothers me the most. And honestly, Haunted Cosmos did an episode on fairies where they said just that. Normally they'll say ghosts are demons. Obviously, yeah, if you hear real ghost stories where people are actually being haunted by things, and I do believe that ghost hauntings can be real, but not because ghosts are real, but because demons are real, and demons can haunt you. We know that demons possess people in the New Testament. We know that demons have some sort of power, even if it's not above God's power. Of course, it's not above God's power. And therefore, we believe that ghosts can haunt people, demons can haunt people, and they often lie. So they'll say, I am the ghost of some daughter that used to live here, and you need to whip yourself 50 times because I was once whipped 50 times. These are just lies. They're lies from demons who are having fun, or they're torturing people. We should not believe demons. The Bible says you shouldn't talk with spirits for a reason, because they lie. So we should not talk with them. We shouldn't believe the lies they give. And so I believe that ghosts are lies. The Haunted Cosmos does typically too. They're like, ghosts are lying demons. However, on the same hand, they'll hear a story about fairies, they're just ghost stories. It's like somebody is walking in the woods and they encounter a tiny little elf guy, a fairy, and the tiny little elf guy is like, how have you stumbled into my realm? And then they'll wake up an hour later and 5 days have actually passed in real life, and they've been passed out in the forest for like 5 days. Okay, it could be fake, right? It could be a fake story. Or it could be kind of a real event that happened to somebody because they were possessed by a demon in the woods and, lost track of time, and they came out 5 days later. I would never call that the Haunted Cosmos says, well, I don't know that fairies are evil necessarily, because they didn't really do anything to the person while they were passed out in the forest. So maybe they're a third kind of creature. They're intelligent spirit creatures that aren't necessarily demons, but clearly they're not angels and they're not people. So they're some third category that lives out there and is neutral. I think that is a very, very dangerous category to create because, one, it's not talked about in the Bible. Two, I thought we were all about saying there's no neutrality, no in between God or Satan. You're either on one side or the other. And three, it sounds pretty demon-y to say, I'm neutral. Like, you can kind of trust me. Like, I'll probably give you some decent advice. It's just so demonic. And fairies are exactly the kind of thing that Christians have worked for millennia to put away as myth, right? It took thousands of years to get Ireland to stop believing in fairies. Even though they believed in God and Jesus, they would also still believe in fairies. It is syncretic myth, and I do not believe we should be in the business of opening that crypt back up and saying, oh yeah, maybe they're real. It's crazy. It's a way of getting spiritists and mediums to try to talk to fairies, which is just demon talk. That's the kind of thing that bothers me the most. Like, believe in mermaids, whatever. Like, nobody's trying to talk to mermaids because you can't get to them. They're out in the ocean. But fairies, people are trying to talk to. There's, like, very famous, best-selling novels out there about having sweet love affairs with fairies. That is demonic. That's super demonic, right? Having sex with women as a fairy, I'm having Genesis vibes, aren't you?
Are they Wiccan?
The books?
Yeah.
The books aren't Wiccan. They're not like into like witchcraft specifically. It's like the fairy world is a realm and it's filled with hot, steamy dudes, and it's like Twilight. It's like vampires, just another thing. Like some mythical creature that's really hot takes me away.
It's neutral.
It's neutral, right? Or he's a bad boy, and I love him. Anyways, that has like serious cultural weight and has for millennia, and so I don't think we should be, maybe they're real. I really don't think we should play around with that.
In the Bible, there's a clear binary there, or bifurcation. That's a good word, right? Mm-hmm. There's heaven and hell. There's saints and sinners. And Jesus says, if you do not gather with me, you scatter. One reason, I'll say Dr. Richard Gallagher, he's a exorcist guy, but he's also a Yale educated, board certified psychiatrist who teaches at New York Medical College and Columbia University. And he said demons want to sow doubt. They don't want to confirm their existence necessarily. Mm-hmm. um, kind of like gaslighting, I guess, like
Right.
affecting you without you knowing it. So with like this fairy category, perhaps they're trying to reform themselves or reframe themselves so as to not be put in the category of demons, so that perhaps they could deceive someone, um, yeah, for a malevolent purpose.
Right, and that's exactly it. That's exactly the kind of play that I would be wary of, because it wouldn't be the first time that I think demons have run that play, and I don't think it takes fast coordination. Like, there's a lot of things that we often culturally attribute to the forces of Satan that I don't think are fair, because I don't think they're that coordinated. Like huge, they're not sovereign like God is. So if it required a super sovereign, all-knowing hand to accomplish, I do not believe it was the sole work of demons, right? I think God is sovereign over things alone. But a really local deception play where they pretend to be a neutral force and then deceive a particular person or a family or a township, that has happened countless times throughout history. And I think it is very, very easy for a demon to try something like that. And that's why I don't think we should allow for the category that the fae folk, the fair folk, the elves, gnomes, whatever your culture calls them, that these little, neutral, kind of mischievous helpers aren't demons, right? They are demons, and we should treat them as such. They are deceivers and liars, and we should rebuke them in the name of Jesus, because that's what makes them flee, and so it should.
There are also different, as I was reading, different species of fairies, which gives credence to how it varies by region of the world that you're in. And they look like either leprechauns or normal humans, and they can look like a banshee is a species, or like type, a wailing woman. And there's also the ones that take lovers to the forest, so into the mound. So sounds pretty demonic to me.
And this rabbit hole will get a lot weirder, and we're not really the podcast for it. You can get into some really weird stuff, but I will say the waters get muddied. They try to get muddied, and again, I think it's a demonic lie here, and or just straight up fake from humans. But there's stories of fairies that switch out babies. So weirdly enough, it's a common tradition, at least in the Germanic North, so Ireland and Scandinavia and other northern European places, that fairies or gnomes or elves or whatever, that they take babies and then switch them out for changelings. So like, you had your baby and it's sitting in the crib, and then late at night the fairy comes and steals that baby and replaces it with something that looks exactly like your baby, but eventually that baby dies. And I think it's pretty obvious that this is some mental coping with babies who die, right? Sudden infant death syndrome or stillborns or whatever else. That's not my baby. My baby's still alive someplace, but this baby is a fake. I think that's pretty obvious. Haunted Cosmos wants to downplay that because they want to believe in the supernatural, and that sounds like a really lame excuse, and it kind of is, except that's such a traumatic event for a person. A lot of things don't require some crazy explanation, and when atheists say that people were just making up Jesus being raised from the dead, it's hard to believe, right? But somebody's baby dying and trying to say that it's not really their baby, it really does sound like a grief-stricken woman or father that is coming up with an excuse on why they don't have to be sad anymore. That's what I would say for these changeling stories. But the changeling stories go further. So they'll say not only do sometimes the babies get changed out and then they die, and the real baby is out there in fairyland living it up, but there are some stories that go even further and say that the changeling grows up like a kid, but then they're different and they're evil, and they are like an evil orphan. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Orphan, but they're like an evil kid, and then they try to kill you or do evil things and weird things, which again may be an excuse for hating your kid or wanting to kill your kid. I don't know. There's a lot of weird potential incentives to come up with these stories about your children not being really your children, so that you can kill them. Sounds pretty. Might I suggest it sounds demonic to me, right? Some excuse to try to kill your children. Lastly, there are some stories in which the child admits to being a changeling and then says they belong in the fairy world, and then they take the parents to the fairy world, and then the fairy world converts to Christianity. Or there's some stories where the particular fairy clan already was Christian, which is odd. And it made the Haunted Cosmos podcast say, that's all the more evidence why they might be a third category of creatures because they are submitted to Christ. However, might I remind everybody that Mormons also supposedly submit to Christ and are not Christian. So I might further say these supposedly Christian gnomes or fairies or whatever ridiculous thing, it's just a demonic lie. It's just a demonic lie. Like, you do not need to believe they are a Bible-breaking category of creature to believe that they faked pretending to be Christians. You know, like, just sounds demonic. Aliens probably are another thing that's like a whole other category. Mythical creature, they're not real. Aliens often talk about Jesus, and to people who see them, right? People that have visions of aliens often talk about Jesus, which seems pretty weird considering they're aliens, and it seems like Jesus wouldn't be that relevant to their atheist perspective. But these aliens often talk about Jesus, and often they will say that Jesus is one of them, or that like Jesus was their precursor, or that Jesus knew about them, or some connection to Jesus that's positive, not necessarily negative. And we firmly believe, and we've talked about it before in this podcast, that aliens are demons. Like, if you have a mind-bending vision because you're on ayahuasca where aliens communicate with you, that sounds a lot like you're just communicating with spirits like they have been doing for thousands of years. And when they talk about Jesus, that's like red flag number 8 here. The ayahuasca is red flag number 1. You've hit a lot so far. The red flag number 8 is when the aliens start talking about Jesus. That's probably not a good sign. So yes, I think demons run this play a lot where they pretend to be Christian and they're just not.
Throwback to spirit science.
Right.
And a few different polls I saw said like maybe 30 to 60%, the different polls. 30 to 60% of U.S. adults believe in aliens, and UFOs being from aliens, and things like that. And that's just more to the point of like the gaslighting of it.
Right.
And they don't necessarily believe these aliens are evil. They might just believe these aliens want to communicate with them, or want to explore or discover or run some tests, or whatever. And so they have essentially a neutral perspective of potential demonic life forms.
Yeah, it's the fairy thing all over again. And that's why we already have enough problems of our own right now. We don't need to open up really old, bad, stupid problems, because in 1,000 years from now, hopefully, aliens are considered a bad, stupid, old problem that's been dead for 1,000 years. And we're dealing with it right now. So I think we should focus our time on debunking aliens and showing them to be either totally fake or demonic activity, and not resurrecting fairies and pretending like fairies might be real. Like, that is just 1,000-year-old aliens, right? The demons are running a very similar play where they say, oh, we're from another land, that's why you've never seen us before, and you can only see us when you're high, because that's the way we work. And we know about Jesus, and we orchestrated all of human events until this very moment, and you are our chosen one. It's funny while it's one guy in the desert that's on local news. That's funny, right? He's crazy. He's been attacked by demons. It's not funny when it forms a cult and kills all its members, right? Heaven's Gate, very famous cult in the 90s that killed all its... They all committed ritual suicide because they believed aliens were coming back and were going to beam them up into their ship. And to enter the ship, you needed to kill yourself because they would only beam you up spiritually. And that also seems kind of fringe because it's those crazy cult people, but... Like you just said, Theodore, 30 to 60% of the whole U.S. believes in some form of alien, which is essentially saying 30 to 60% of the U.S. believes in some sort of fairy. And that mythology can be really, really dangerous when it enacts really, really weird things. And we've seen mass hysteria for things like COVID. Imagine if demons were able to play some sort of mass hysteria with aliens where everybody had to... everybody was starting to, even if they didn't have to. They started to smoke ayahuasca to communicate to aliens, and we're getting really bad versions of Christianity from that. And these things are dangerous. I don't think that we should take them lightly or pretend like they are real or probably real or whatever else. I think they're pretty plainly demonic plays. Yeah, we spent a lot of time on that, beating that dead horse. And there's thousands of mythological creatures you could talk about. I think most of them are straight up either demon or was an old animal. Like, it's kind of exciting because it's an old extinct animal, but it's not that special. Like, dinosaurs are real and they're cool, but it's not like life-changing that you know about dinosaurs. or they're fairies. They're like straight up a demonic spiritual play. There are some categories that I think are just straight fake, like cyclopses, straight fake. Unicorns, what? They're straight fake, guys, straight fake. They're on Men-at-Arms crests. Haunted Cosmos is like, they're referenced in lists of animals. They'll be like bears and crocodiles and unicorns and mythological animals. So that seems odd that they're just referenced there. Doesn't that seem like they're just a regular animal? They must be real. And I was looking at a children's book just today that was naming off creatures. A is for alligator, B is for bear, C is for cat, D is for dog, and U, because it's a hard letter to go with, they're like, U is for unicorn. There was no other mythological creatures were in this book except for unicorn. And we don't believe unicorns are real today. Nobody's seen these unicorns today. So unicorns are they're just fake. We don't have evidence for unicorns.
Scotland would beg to differ. It's the national animal of Scotland.
Yeah, they're fake. They're fake. So that's the kind of stuff that you only have crappy mythology for. And of course, I mean, it could be an animal, right? Like, it's not like categorically impossible for God to have made a horse with a horn on its head, but we have no outside evidence of that happening. We certainly don't have any biblical evidence of unicorns. So I would just call it one fake and leave it be. Like, don't be caught up so much that you believe in the supernatural that you believe in fake supernatural. We don't need to. We don't have to believe that Game of Thrones really happened to also say the Bible really happened, just because they're both books.
Yes, because once you open that Pandora's box, you end up having to consider myths that are just bizarre and wild. For example, I was looking up some Incan myths since I haven't read them in a while. There's one creature called Jaharcha in which a person has committed incest and probably has died. When the soul leaves the body, it becomes an llama with the face of a human. Now, as disturbing as it's really disturbing, some of the depictions that I see here. So that is, someone got high with actual ayahuasca since it's grown in Peru and just created that myth.
Yeah, and you don't even have to get high. Again, I feel like the Haunted Cosmos and others are pretending like these things are so outrageous that you could never have come up with them, so they must be real. But like R.L. Stine is a kid's horror book writer, and he comes up with stuff all the time. And I don't think he's high. I mean, maybe he is, but I don't think he's high. He's just thinking about it. I came up with crazy stuff when I was in 4th grade too, and I was not high, definitively. So people can be creative and make up weird things. It's not impossible.
I suppose. Did George Lucas take something when he made all those creatures for Star Wars?
Yeah, probably not, right? He just thought of
Yeah.
them.
Okay.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts, men, on mythologies? I know it's been a little scattered shot here, but I wanted to touch on the issue because there are certainly mythological creatures that are real, and there's certainly ones that are demons, so they're kind of real, right? They're demonically, they're not totally made up from people. But I was trying to push back on this growing Christian movement of believing in whatever sounds cool because it's cool, and we also believe in God, who is also cool. And in doing that, we open up these old lies that should have been left dead.
Not for me.
So, we mentioned Haunted Cosmos, and saying they take some things too far. Sometimes because they just think it's more interesting, and therefore they want to. Who knows why else they might do that? But nonetheless, their first and foremost catchphrase is basically, the world is not just stuff. It's not just material. And they're just trying to further point that out. They're sharing all these stories, some truth, some myth. And probably like 80% of the world believes that it's not just stuff. At least, now, if you're an atheist or talking with your atheist friends, you're probably going to say, yeah, there's absolutely only material. But even some of those are probably going to think there is some sort of afterlife or some sort of supernatural aspect kind of thing. But yeah, nonetheless, the world is not just stuff, as Haunted Cosmos says. But also take what they say with a grain of salt.
Yes. I don't
because they're
think
not
they
speaking
are
biblical truths.
Yeah, they're not practicing discernment. That's what I'd say. They kind of are. I mean, they are to a certain extent because they are gatekeeping a little bit, and they're not just saying everything is true. They're saying you got to take the true elements from this thing. So they're not buying it wholesale.
Right.
But I almost feel like that's even more dangerous because it seems more reasonable than it really is. And I'm sure we're all aware that in the conservative Christian circle, so all the liberal Christian circle has tons of problems. I wouldn't want to be in that side. But the conservative Christian circle right now, a big problem in the conservative Christian movement, in the US at least, is like pseudoscience. It's fake pseudoscience, right? People thinking that, like essentially believing Eastern mysticism within the church. And that needs to be stopped, right? Yoga, and Hadakazos will be with me here. Yoga needs to get out of the church, right? I mean, there's innocuous things about yoga, but spiritual practice of yoga need to be not ignored and taken out of the church. Same goes for weird essential oil beliefs that essential oils heal you when they don't. I think we have to be really careful with pseudoscience because the world has lied to us, and we feel like they've lied to us because they don't believe in young earth, they don't believe in the Bible, and so we're naturally skeptical of the world. Great. But the Lord has gifted us with many truths that we don't want to bury again. So modern medicine is a truth that I don't think we should bury again. We shouldn't believe it wholeheartedly because, of course, there's secularists and flawed humans in science just like there is anyplace else. But I do not believe the proper reaction to secular culture is retreating to mythology, pretending like mermaids are real or pretending like peanuts are going to cure cancer. We have to practice discernment, especially as men. I think men are the gatekeepers of their wives and of society as a whole. And so especially as men, not that women can't gatekeep here too, but I think especially as men, we should be extra discerning and skeptical of mythology of any sort. And I think the conservative Christian movement in particular has been losing the battle, or at least tolerated mythology within the church. And that's why I'm extra concerned by movements like Honda Cosmos, because I totally appreciate them wanting to be bold about the Bible being true and not being ashamed of the supernatural parts of the Bible. But the way they discern whether or not mermaids are true is so undiscerning that I think that's exactly the kind of thinking that gets people to believe that essential oils will heal them from things that it won't. And not only is that bad because you might die from something you were taking the wrong medicine for, but it also puts Christians to shame. It makes us backwards. And I don't think that's a sustainable model for Christians to take, is an undiscerning view of the world. I think we should be discerning. We should be as innocent as doves and as wise as serpents.
And we want to treat these people, everyone in the Christian group, with respect. They are brothers and sisters that have lived, and for better or worse, they believed in odd things during their lives. Like Clement of Rome, some say the first pope, I say one of the many bishops, or maybe even scribe of Rome, believed in the phoenix. Mm-hmm. And he used it in one of his letters to show how Christ rose from the dead, just like the phoenix rises from the dead. It's like, look at the phoenix. Can't you see how just this creature lives and dies and rises again? Jesus Christ is the same thing. Okay, Clement, you need to calm down. That phoenix is a Greek mythological creature. Mm-hmm. And then also Origen, which I didn't know he had written on fairies. It's like, yeah, of course. Yeah, they're not demons. Like, God can create other creatures too. No, they're demons. So, actually, Origen, is he even a Christian? Probably a bad example, but
there's a question.
Yes, but you get the point. We need to treat each other with respect and point out flaws in our arguments. So we invite others to, if we are mistaken, and some myths do indeed point to God's greatness, you can put it on the comments below. If you agree, also let us know and put it down in the comments below.
Yes. And I think also we should have an air of humility in that 100 years from now, they could be looking back at us and be like, oh my gosh, they were still cooking their food with microwaves. Were they demented, right? That obviously gives them cancer. So like, I leave a lot of room for us to be totally wrong as well. That's why I think we have enough wrong. And we don't have to go back to like how we were wrong in the 1600s. Like leave some stuff as learned. We learned that fairies are not real, right? We shouldn't pick that back up. Deal with our own problems today.
And going a little bit back, you mentioned like essential oils, and oh goodness, how you can get drawn into this stuff and deceived by it, and like essential oils, yoga, or non-biblical meditation. I think you mentioned women, maybe. Yes. How they might be more prone to get into this stuff, or we need to be like the protectors or gatekeepers or something like that, as men especially. Mm-hmm. like Paul says, 'cause Adam was not deceived, but Eve was. And because Eve was deceived and Adam probably trusted Eve,
Acquiesced.
therefore they both were deceived. Now, if they if they would have been together, if Eve would have checked with Adam, maybe they could have had a discussion. Maybe they could have reasoned together from what God has had told them. And so, similarly, we today need to reason together with the scriptures and not go beyond what is written. We need to hold to biblical truth, not delve into these things so far. We can listen to them, sure, but don't make them like your life. Don't delve into them so deep that eventually you get taken by them.
Right.
In a sense.
And
so
anybody with eyes to see, and I hope this doesn't come across as superiority, because it's not. I think there's fingers pointing on both sides here. It's pretty typical demonic play from the Garden of Eden until now for women to be the target of the attack first, and then that men are passive and they allow it to infect things. Like, that's the sin of both of them, right? Passivity in men and foolish undiscernment in women. It shouldn't be surprising then, and it should be a flag to us that the weird conservative movement that involves alternative health things is definitely strong in conservative women, not men. And that should be a sign that there's clearly some sort of play being had here. That's not to say that everything about conservative alternative health stuff is false, and it's not what I mean either. Like I said, in 100 years, I'm sure we will have new wisdom that says that things that we do today are wrong. So it's not to totally discount the whole movement, but it can get pretty wild, right? It can get into like delivering yourself from demons in mixed fiber clothings and other things like that just they're not real. And it should be a red flag to us that it is mainly women that are pushing these things. I hope that's not so controversial to say, because I think that's pretty bared out by the facts. And so we should be careful with modern day mythologies as well. And like I said, we have enough mythology in the day right now that we need to worry about and discern. So there's no need to dig back up Greek mythology or Irish mythology or whatever else that's already been put to death. Yeah, and that's why we have found our cause in serving the Lord Jesus Christ. Wow, this episode went everywhere. I've been Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right has been
Sebastian, the bookkeeper,
and
archivist.
Across the airwaves, it's been
Theodore, under the PC.
Thank you for listening. If you have aggressive comments to tell us about my misogynist comments here, please put them in the comments. I'm happy to read them, and maybe I'll be corrected. Until next time, we talk about something completely different. We are on Spotify and iTunes and YouTube and Facebook, so look us up there. We'll talk about something completely different, I promise you, next time. So if you didn't like this topic, pick the next episode. It'll be better. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.